is disasters. So as we have talked recently during our discussion about some disaster, man-made disaster, isn't it? So a disaster can be both man-made and it can be natural. How we can define the disaster? So I have taken it from WHO website. So a disaster is defined as a sudden, calamitous event that seriously disrupts the functioning of a community or society and causes human, material, and economic or environmental losses that exceed the community's or society's ability to cope using its own resources. So disaster is something which is not natural, which is not looking natural, isn't it? So it disrupts the natural life. So let us take the example. When the flood will come, what will happen? The whole population, whether it is the humans or it is the animals, it is the microorganisms in the soil, everybody is going to get affected, whether it is the trees, whatever it may be. So now they are not living the natural life. The humans cannot live in a natural condition. They cannot be natural. They cannot sow themselves naturally, because if there is water everywhere, you cannot go anywhere from your home. The supply, the food chain supply, it can get interrupted. So somehow disaster is a very difficult scenario, very difficult condition. When tsunami will come, somewhere the tsunami, even it come to 20 or 30 meter height of waves come inside the island. So that is not a natural, it is not day-to-day activity. It happens sudden. And due to that sudden happening, what happened? It causes losses. And from the beginning of the civilization event, we are seeing these type of losses. We are seeing this type of disasters. Disasters may be in terms of natural phenomenon. So naturally it can happen. For example, flood can come naturally. The tsunami can come naturally. Hurricane can come naturally. But some of the phenomenon, it can be human-made. So human-induced disaster. For example, you take the example of some bombardment at some place. So it is a sudden phenomenon. Bombardment of atom bomb or nuclear bomb at some places, it is a sudden phenomenon. It disrupts the whole life. So that is also an example of disaster. So disaster can be man-made also. It can be natural also. Another definition of disaster is that a disaster is an occurrence disrupting the normal condition of existence and causing a level of suffering that exceeds the capacity of adjustment of the affected community. Now, there are a few terms we have to understand. One is hazard. What is this hazard? So, a natural or human-made event that threatens the adversely affects human life, threatens to adversely affect human life, property, or activity to the extent of causing a disaster, isn't it? So these are the, what are hazard? Hazard are small phenomenon which can become disaster in a long run. For example, pesticide is a hazard. Let us suppose we are applying pesticide in our fields. No doubt by using pesticide, we can control the pest in our agricultural field. But if the amount of pesticide which is applied in the agricultural field, it can somehow exceed, then there may be in a long run a disaster can come in terms of serious water pollution. So the hazard is what? Slowly and gradually the hazard is going to get converted into some great event, some great disaster. Similarly, lead poisoning, tobacco smoking, which the youngsters or anybody do, tobacco smoking, that can cause a lot of problems in the future days. So here you can see a picture, what they are doing, what is this hazard. So just when we are using some hazardous material, for example, we are using the lead, pesticide, tobacco, whatever, we are trying to pollute the brain of the earth, isn't it? And slowly and gradually, when the brain of the earth will get polluted by these hazard, certainly a disaster can come. So what is hazard? A natural or human-made event that threatens to adversely affects human life, property, or activity to the extent of causing a disaster. Now, what is risk? Risk is the probability of being affected by the unwanted consequence of a hazard. So let us suppose, let us take an example by asking a question that what is the risk of getting lung cancer when we smoke every day 12 cigarettes? So certainly it will come in terms of probability. What is the probability that one person can get sick? What is the probability then when I will eat a lead contaminated fish, then I will get some disease. So this is all related to some probability. So risk is associated with the probability, isn't it? Risk combines the label of hazard and degree of vulnerability. So you see a formula is there, very simple formula. Risk equal to hazard into vulnerability. Vulnerability. So what is this hazard? Hazard are those chemicals or activity which can cause in long-term disaster. So it is simply the combination of label of hazard and degree of vulnerability. So what is vulnerability? So vulnerability has commonly been deemed as the possibility of being wounded. Vulnerability, isn't it? So possibility, it is also a possibility. Let us ask a question. Vulnerability assessment of groundwater due to lead poisoning, due to lead contamination. So vulnerability is simply, what is this? This is the possibility, probability of being wounded. The complex relationship between vulnerability and resilience are an area of interest to disaster theorists, researchers, and practitioners. So resilience, that means to get out from a wound, that is the resilience. So it is a complex, always researchers is trying to set a relation between the vulnerability and the resilience. That if there is some vulnerability, and how the community, how the nation, how the earth will get resilience. There are many types of disasters are there. Simply, if we will try to quantify the types of disaster, there may be natural and man-made. So certainly some of the disaster may be natural, some of the disaster may be man-made. There is some other definitions of the types of disasters also. So these are some sudden onset disasters, slow onset disasters, industrial technological disasters, complex emergencies, and biological disasters. Sudden onset disasters, it includes flood, it includes earthquake, tsunami, landslides, volcanic eruptions. These are the examples of sudden onset disasters. Sudden onset disasters occur swiftly and often without any warning. So when flood will come, when some landslide will come, there will be no warning. You will not get any warning that the disaster is coming. So it is sudden. What is slow onset disasters? So the process in this type of disaster will be slow. For example, the drought condition. For example, the famine condition. So famine condition will it cannot come in one day. So we cannot say that and today we have lot of good things. We have lot of foods, and another day we will get a famine. It is not possible. It is a slow process, isn't it? So slow onset disasters. For example, environmental degradation in itself, it is a slow onset disaster. Slow onset disasters are usually the result of adverse weather conditions combined with poor land use, isn't it? So now industrial technological disaster, it results from a society's industrial and technological activities that lead to pollution. So we have industry, and the industries are generating some waste, and then that waste is going to be dumped in the open, in the atmosphere, or in the soil surface. So both can cause problem. So for example, if there is some oil leakage, then it can cause problem. We will discuss these examples in the coming slide. What is complex emergencies? Complex emergencies are usually man-made, isn't it? With multiple contributing factors. They often follow wars between states, internal conflict, and increasing terrorist attack. So let us suppose some terrorist attack will come. Certainly it will be a complex emergency situation. Biological disaster, what is this biological disaster? So if the disaster is due to some epidemic disease, then it can cause biological disasters. So you can see one of the biological disasters which we are facing presently, that is the COVID. These are the examples of natural disasters. So flood can be the example, drought, earthquake, cyclone, tsunami. These are the examples of natural disasters. Examples of biological disasters, that can be the dengue, HIV, AIDS, mad cow disease, and you can add many more biological disasters which we have seen, or the humanity has seen in the past also. Now, there are several phases of disaster. I have enumerated all the points here. So first is the pre-emergency phase. What is this pre-emergency phase? The period before the disaster. That strikes may be used to assess how often a particular community is exposed to different risks. So it is simply a study. So if some emergency situation will come, if some disaster, if there is some possibility of coming the disaster, what are the plans we have? So that is the pre-emergency phase. Impact and flight phase. So when a disaster strike, what will happen? It will displace a lot of people, isn't it? From one point to another. So that is the impact and flight phase. What are the consequences? How many people will get displaced from one point to another point? How the animals will get affected? How the buildings and everything get? What are the economic losses? These things we assess here. What is acute phase? So this phase begins immediately after the impact of the disaster and marks by intense, often reactive activities by many humanitarian agencies. So let us suppose when WHO or some other UNO, when they will come for help, and they start to provide the water, sanitation, basic health care, that will be the acute phase. What is post-emergency phase? So post-emergency phase is after the disaster, after the emergency which will come. So what we will do after, when the emergency situation will get over, when the disaster will come, after that we will make settlement of the people. The mass movement of the people, we have to stop it somehow. That will stop. We have to recreate the buildings, tracing the reproductive health care. We have to see the mental health care of the peoples also. So these will come into the post emergency phase. Now we will have a repatriation phase. What happens in this? After the emergency situation is over, displaced people are expected to return to their place of origin. Rehabilitation, what we do here, we reconstruct the houses. We try to manage the economical situation of the person who is affected. So these things we do. So these are the different phases of disasters. Now I will provide you some of the examples which the humanity has faced in terms of disaster. So one example is an earthquake which has come in a Syrian city whose name is Aleppo. And the earthquake has come in 1138 AD. And at that time, the record of death was approximately 230,000. So it is only a small figure, 280,000. So the earthquake, what is the time of the earthquake? It may be only in minutes or less than a minute. But the consequence of the earthquake is very severe. So you see, a simple earthquake which has come in 1138, it has taken the life of more than 2 lakhs. A tsunami which has come in 2004 in Indian Ocean, that is also an example of natural disaster. On the Richter scale, the earthquake which has caused the tsunami, that was 9.8, 9.1. 9.1 is a very big value as far as the earthquake is concerned. So due to that earthquake which has come in the Indian Ocean, certainly the tsunami has generated and it has affected a lot of peoples. Due to that, the tsunami has traveled at a speed of 804 kilometers per hour. So you can understand what can be the fastness, what can be the speed of this. It originated undersea off the west coast of Sumatra, Indonesia, on December 26, 2004. So you see, it has been taken from Wikipedia. These are the country which has got affected. So this colored photo, they are showing what are the countries which has get affected by this tsunami. And tsunami has taken a lot of life. In terms of death only, it was more than 2 lakhs. And it has displaced millions of people, isn't it? So only in 14 South Asian countries, it has displaced millions of people. This is one of the natural flood which has come in 1931 in Yangtze River floods. Yangtze River, isn't it? So the flood which has been created due to this river, due to heavy rainfall, no doubt. It is known as one of the deadliest flood event in the record of the human history. 60 centimeter of rainfall, it has just happened in 1 month. That means in July 1931, which causes Yangtze River to overtop its banks. And it affected more than 1,80,000 square kilometers. So this is the river of Yangtze River. This I have taken from NASA Earth Observatory. You see, this is the river, and this is present figure. That is not the figure which of the flood figure. It is not the flood figure, but it's simply just I have given you to show the river which has caused that flood situation in 1931. So it has taken that flood. It has taken the life of more than 2 million people. So you can imagine the extent at which it has caused the problem. So you go and you may go on the internet, you read about 1931 Yangtze River floods. There are a lot of books also. You will able to know that if the flood will come, what will be the scenario? What can be the scenario? Another disaster is Honkaiko colliery disaster. It is a mining area, and it is one of the worst mining disaster in which more than 1,500 workers lost their life. So it is also example of China. It is from China colliery. Honkaiko, it is in China. Gas exploded in one of the shaft on April of 1942, and due to that, it sent flames bursting out of the entrance. In that also, a lot of people, 1,500 miners, they have got killed. So this is a man-made disaster. Oil spill is also one of the very great problem. It is also taken as a disaster. One of the example I'm giving you, that is of the largest marine oil spill in history, began on April 20, 2010, when an explosion rocked the Deepwater Horizon oil rig. So let us suppose if the Deepwater Horizon is a company, so they are extracting and they are exporting the oil. So a gas leak has happened in this area. You see with the movement of current, how you can move from one point to another. So that oil spill can become a great problem, great contamination for all the areas where the wave current or the ocean current will go. So by the time the whale was sealed in September 2010, and estimated 4.9 million barrels of oil had leaked into the Gulf, and immense damage has been done to the Gulf economy and ecology. Another example is Fukushima nuclear disaster crisis. This is also a man-made disaster. So Japan's worst nuclear disaster was triggered by the massive earthquake and tsunami that occurred on. Casualties in this, but it has created a lot of nuisance, a lot of problem in terms of water pollution, water contamination by this nuclear material. It has created a lot of nuisance, a lot of problem in terms of water pollution, water contamination by this nuclear material. Bhopal gas tragedy, it is one of a tragedy which has happened in our country. And it is taken as one of the single worst industrial accident which has happened in Bhopal on December 3, 1984. In terms of quantity, approximately 45 tons of the dangerous gas methyl cyanate escaped from the Union Carbide plant in Bhopal. It killed thousands of people immediately and creating a panic as tens of thousands of others attempted to flee Bhopal. Final death toll was estimated to be between 15,000 and 20,000, while 500,000 survivors suffered respiratory problems, eye irritation, or blindness. So Bhopal gas tragedy has happened in 1984, but the consequence is still, it can be seen in the people, the person who is living there. Still the person are fighting there for the justice due to this tragedy, but they have not, till now, they have not get the adequate justice which they should get. So this is also one of the example of human-induced disaster. These type of disasters are generally caused by some mechanical failure. These type of disasters, industrial disaster, nuclear disaster, it can be triggered by some natural events also. So for example, if we will take the example of Fukushima nuclear crisis, so in itself, there was no problem in the nuclear facility. There was no breakdown in the nuclear facility. The crisis has triggered due to some earthquake and the tsunami. So certainly that tsunami and that earthquake, that had triggered the problem. But it had become the man-made. Since the scenario was created, the whole area, the whole industry was created by the humans. That's why it is a human-induced crisis, nuclear crisis. Similarly, in Bhopal tragedy also, there was some accidental problem. By accident, the gas has got leaked. As the staff of the industry, they used to say that accidentally that has got leaked. But somehow it is the fault of the humans. It is the human-induced problem, human-induced tragedy. And the consequence is that the illness, still the person which is living in the Bhopal, they are facing illness due to that. And the generation which is coming, the next generation to next generation, they are also get some illness due to that gas. Isn't it? So these are the examples of the long-term consequences. So let us suppose if some water contamination, uranium contamination will come into water as a water pollution, or if it will come into the atmosphere, it will not go from the atmosphere, from the water in a short time. It will take years, decades, 50 years, 60 years, isn't it? More than that also. So whoever will live with that scenario, in that situation, with that air, with that water pollution, certainly those all will get affected, whether he belongs to that accidental time or not. So if the accident has taken place in 2011, certainly the person who is living near the nuclear crisis, even in 2020, they can also feel some of the problems, because the pollution was persistent in nature. It has come into the atmosphere. It has come into the water system. So it is going to affect. So some of the disaster is very short. It has short life. For example, if the flood will come in some region, certainly for that year, the person will get affected. After 10 years, the people, the boy who will take, that will not get affected too much. But in these type of crises, which is human-induced and which nuclear, for example, if there is nuclear crisis, if there is some chemical, persistent chemical which has been leaked, that can cause a very serious issue, even after the disaster for a very long time, even for decades, it can create the problem. So today we have discussed some of the examples of the disaster. We have discussed some of the type. We will discuss something else for the next class. Okay, thank you very much. If you have